actually get to talk about some of my favourite books today. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for being here. So I've been thinking of ideas for videos that I could do, and obviously this is quite a new channel, so I wanted to do things that would help you get to know me a little bit, help you get to know me as a person and also my reading tastes. And I was thinking about what I could do, and I thought that my reading tastes are really defined by the authors that I would describe as my favourite authors. There's plenty of authors I really enjoy the books and I'll buy a lot of what they write, but there's a list of about 10 that are all-time favourite authors. I will buy anything that they write. I will have it pre-ordered, ready to arrive on the day it comes out. And also just that their stories have impacted me both as a reader but also as a general person. So I thought I'm going to start a little bit of a series where I pick one of those sort of top 10 favourite authors for each video and talk through my journey with reading their books. Some of them I absolutely love. There are some of these books that I didn't enjoy as much as others. You'll see that in today's video actually. But just kind of talk about why I love the author, why I love their writing, and what my sort of journey is with their books. So I decided for the first author to pick, I would go with someone who writes a little bit more contemporary, because so far in this channel I've realised I've talked a lot about fantasy. And fantasy is not usually the genre that I would read the most of. Looking at my stats for this year, I've read about 50% fantasy, so it's definitely been a shift. But my general go-to usually has been contemporary. So I thought I'd start with that. Although actually we are starting a little bit out of my normal comfort zone with contemporary, because I'm going to start with somebody who also does graphic novels. So the author I'm going to talk about today is none other than Alice Oseman. So I have read, I believe, everything that Alice Oseman has written or published so far, and I'll talk you through sort of where my journey started with reading her books, because she does have graphic novels and she has prose, and a lot of people start with one or the other. I happen to come in through her graphic novels. So the first book of Alice Oseman's that I ever read was Heartstopper. I love Heartstopper. I think if you hear anybody talk about this on BookTube, you hear them gush about it. It is just the cutest, most adorable, sort of wholesome story, but while also dealing with quite difficult topics in there. It just, oh, it's so good. So for anyone who maybe doesn't know, this tells the story of Charlie and Nick and tells their love story throughout the years. So it tells the story of two teenage boys who are in sixth form and end up getting placed in class together where they meet and sort of develop a friendship, and then feelings evolve later on as well. At the beginning of the book, Charlie has been out as gay at school for about a year, I believe, whereas Nick is still figuring out what his sexuality is, and the first sort of 2 volumes of this are really about their relationship developing while Nick is figuring out his feelings and sort of where he stands in terms of his own sexuality. And then there is also, just to point out a couple of things, there's also trigger warnings in here for mental health and eating disorder conversations. It's not explicit, but just to let you know that it is there if that is something that can be triggering for you, particularly as we get further on. So like I said, the first book is quite light-hearted. It's just them two getting to know each other. Then we go into the second volume, which is a little bit more about how the relationship evolves. And the first book is about discovering feelings, the second book is about sort of the relationship coming together. And then the third volume, this one, and this one is about everyone else finding out a little bit more about the relationship. And also this one is the one where it starts to go into some of the mental health struggles that one of the characters deals with. I have actually read more than these. So Alice has a Patreon that you can support where you actually get to read the pages as and when she draws them. So generally it's daily when the schedule allows. You'll get a page sent to your inbox every night. So I've read the entirety of volume 4 now through those pages. I do have my physical copy pre-ordered. You can also read the comic online. So it started as a webcomic. It's actually based on 2 characters from one of Alice's other books, which I will get into in a minute. And I'd heard about it, and I'd heard about her books. I'd heard about particularly Radio Silence. I think at the time I started reading this, it maybe was Solitaire and Radio Silence that were out, but I heard about them and wasn't sort of pushed to pick them up straight away. I had them on my radar but wasn't too fussed. And then I was on a trip, actually. I was on a trip to London and I'd gone down by myself. I was there for a few days. And the first thing I did was go to a bookshop and bought a load of books to have in the hotel room at night to read. I sort of didn't take many with me because I thought I'm going to hit some sort of local bookstores down there and just buy stuff while I'm in there, see what they've got. And I happened to walk in and it was in foils, I believe. They had signed editions of Heartstopper. And I thought, you know what? this seems interesting, signed editions here, I might as well pick it up. And then I devoured this. Like, I took it back to the hotel room that night, read it in a couple of hours, if even that, and just fell in love. Instantly looked up to see if there was more I could read and found that it was available as webcomics, so read more online as well. And the rest is kind of history. I just loved, like I said, sort of, it's very wholesome. There's nothing to not love about it. It's just so cute. This is still probably my favourite thing that Alice creates. Like I said, I do contribute to her Patreon, so I get those pages, so I'm always waiting for that to come into my inbox every night. It just really sort of led me down the path following her career, starting to read her prose, and then that led me to discover one of my new favourite authors. Heartstopper is the beginning of this journey for me. I also do have here as well a copy of the zine. When Heartstopper was originally published physically, it was actually done for a Kickstarter campaign, so it was published independently and then has later been picked up by Hachette, so it has a wider release, but it was originally a self-published work by Alice, and she funded that through a Kickstarter, and one of the rewards on the Kickstarter was a little mini zine with extra scenes. I wasn't sort of around for that, but you were able to then buy this afterwards on Alice's website. I believe she's sold out of them now, but it's nice to have this because it has a few, like I said, sort of extra cute little like Christmas scenes and things, and it's adorable. Speaking of extra scenes as well, alongside that we also have the colouring book. So this came out of, I believe Alice published a couple of colouring pages last year at the beginning of lockdown, something to keep everyone entertained, and then a publisher asked interested in doing more of those, so she did, and this actually really did help me a lot during lockdown last year. So there's some really cute little things. Are the ones I've coloured in, some ones I haven't coloured in yet, but there are, I mean, it's pretty hefty, and there's also I believe six new images in here, alongside some of the mini comics as well that aren't in the main story. So for anyone that is a fan and you haven't seen this, I do recommend picking it up, because even if you're not that interested in colouring, it's just nice to have the actual artwork in there. So after sort of really falling in love with the Heartstopper series, I did decide to look at Alice's prose work, and I went in chronological order actually. So I started with Solitaire. So again, for anyone who doesn't know sort of the story of Solitaire and how it came about actually, so Alice was very young when she was published. She wrote this while she was in sixth form, I believe, so about the age of 17, and was published at, I want to say 19. So, and I will say before I get into this and my thoughts on this, it isn't my favourite of her books, probably because it does read a little bit young, which is fine for somebody who is that age, but for obviously I'm a little bit older than sort of the intended audience for this, and I found that it just read a little bit too young for me, but I can understand why it would be helpful for somebody who is that age. But getting back to the story of this one, so this is actually following, linking back to Heartstopper, this is actually following a character called Tori, who is Charlie from Heartstopper's older sister. The reason that Heartstopper exists actually was that Alice wrote this first and then wanted to carry on writing those characters, but she envisioned them more in a graphic novel setting. With this one, Tori is sort of feeling a little bit despondent, not really sure where she fits in or what she's kind of doing in general with life. And then suddenly one day these anonymous messages start popping up around school, these pranks sort of start happening as well, and they're all leading to this website which is Solitaire, and she's intrigued by that. So it's kind of like a mystery of her figuring out who Solitaire is and why they're doing the things they're doing. There's also a character called Michael Holden who she meets, who's also investigating alongside that. And I mean, it's hard to explain this one without going into too much of it, because it will give spoilers, and to be honest, I can't really tell you exactly what the whole thing was with Solitaire. I think that's it. I have read this twice and I still can't remember exactly what the situation was, because like I said, it's not my all-time favourite. I kind of feel like I'm saying favourite authors and the first book I'm talking about is the one that I actually didn't enjoy that much. But like I said, the characters I really enjoy, and Tori is, I mean, because you're reading from her perspective, she can be a little bit intense because she doesn't have the most positive outlook on life, but it is realistic for somebody of that age. So I do enjoy her. I do enjoy Tori more as a character when I see her pop up in Heartstopper, actually. Heartstopper is set kind of before and after this, and I can see that sort of evolution of her character throughout Heartstopper, and I do like how this fits in. When I've reread this since reading Heartstopper, I do like how I can kind of see where it's going, and I can see sort of the hope at the end of it as well, because I do know how the characters from this move on afterwards. I enjoyed it, but not my favourite. I feel like 2 favourite prose of Alice Oseman, and we're going to get onto one of them next. So I think this is the one that everyone has read and enjoyed of her prose novels, Radio's Islands. Again, actually featuring characters from sort of the Solitaire Heartstopper world. A lot of her books do intertwine a little bit. This follows the story of Frances, who is obsessed with a podcast called Radio's Islands, which to me speaks of kind of like Welcome to Night Vale type podcasts. It's a narrative podcast that has a mystery element to it. She's obsessed with it, and she ends up getting the chance to work for the podcast as an artist, and in that she ends up figuring out who is actually running this podcast and what the story is behind that and why it was created. And that is kind of the main story of it, but it's not really the main point of it. But actually it's all about that sort of critical time in your life when you're right in between sort of adolescence and adulthood, and you're set on this path of you must finish school, go to university, get a job, and that's the set route. And it's about the fact that that might not be the set route for everyone, and that some of those sort of predetermined goals can actually be more detrimental to people than you realise. It's a book I wish that I had when I was like 17 years old, because some of the struggles, so there's a character in this called Alid who is also in the Heartstopper world. A lot of these books do interconnect, and his struggles in particular were kind of horrible to read about because they were so relatable. And I adore this book. I adore Alid in particular as a character, and also the audiobook for this one is really good because it does have the sort of podcast elements in there as well. I think you've probably heard people rave about this book before, and I am going to join in that crowd because it is very, very good, and I do recommend that you all read it. The next book that I read, again, so going in chronological order here, the next book that I read of Alice's was I Was Born for This. Now this one I've seen sort of mixed reviews online, and I'm going to be one of the positive ones here, because for me, on a personal level, there is so much I relate to in this one. It's about a girl called Angel who is obsessed with a boy band called The Ark, and she's sort of in their fandom online and ends up meeting a couple of friends through the online fandom as well, and arranges to go meet up with them to go to their concert. And it's about what happens when she gets there and meets this friend that she's been talking to online, but then also how they end up interacting with the band themselves. Now, when I said I'm going to sort of let you get to know me a little bit more here, I was very much in love with a boy band when I was younger, and met people online that through the fandom community. I'll tell you now that that boy band was the Jonas Brothers. And yeah, there's people that I still talk to online that I met through that fan community, and there's people that I've met in real life through that community. So there's bits of this book that just really spoke to me and my sort of interactions I had as a teenager. I was about sort of 18, 19 when I was going through that, so it's very much relatable for me. I remember taking a picture actually of a quote from this book that was about how fandom makes you feel and how it can really sort of latch onto your soul, and I was just like, yes, this is speaking to me. And I will say this book goes a little bit over the top. Some of the interactions with the boy band themselves and the sort of over the top fans as well that get a little bit too obsessed with them, that went a little bit like, okay, I don't know where we're going with this. The ending of it as well, like sort of last section of the book as well, when the drama started happening, was quite over the top. But I still loved it. Like, it didn't need to be too realistic. It's about a boy band. It's never going to be too relatable to real life anyway, because it's not the life that most of us experience. But the actual sort of characters and the relationships and the said fan culture part of it, I really, really enjoyed. There's also actually, in all of these books, I haven't really spoke too much about it yet, but there's also really good representation in here. So one of the boys in the band is trans, but there's also a bisexual character in this one, and we've got demisexual characters in some of the other ones. The Heartstopper is a very good version of it, because Heartstopper, you've got gay main character, you've got bi main character, you've got a trans character, you've got people of various different races in there as well. So in general, our books do feature quite a diverse cast, which I always really enjoy as well. And that brings me nicely on to the last book, which is Alice's most recent book, which is probably my favourite thing she's ever written. So this is Loveless. This one came out last year, And this one, again, a lot of Alice's books are centred around that sort of university age. And that's because that's when she started writing, so probably the experiences that stuck with her a lot throughout her writing career. But this one in particular is about a character called Georgia. Georgia is just starting university and she has never been in a relationship, never been kissed, never even really had a crush on anybody. And she's starting to question why that is and trying to almost force herself into being the typical university student and get into a relationship when she gets there, and then like, I will meet the right guy and do all this stuff. And then she realises that actually maybe that's not right for her. She ends up joining the LGBT society and hearing terms like asexual and coming to terms with what that means for her. And in terms of the plot of this book, there isn't a lot to say. Like, there's not a massive, like when I said the last one went a little bit over the top with the drama at the end, this one doesn't. It's friendships, there's falling out, so there are some love stories between some of the other characters, but really it's quite a quiet story. It's just about how Georgia comes to terms with that idea of what asexual and aromantic is, and it's a really sort of personal exploration of that. So it is an own voices story as well, and Alice has been fairly open in her interviews about this book about how that's how her sort of discovery of her own sexuality happened. Was, although it's not a sort of autobiographical story, it has definitely drawn on experiences that she had when she was at university and was sort of figuring out where she stood from that point as well. And I feel like you can, when you read it, you can tell it's her most personal story. It reads very true and very, for me, I can tell that this is somebody who has experienced this, who is writing it. I've read other asexual rep before and found it to be a little bit strange, like it just doesn't quite handle it right, whereas this one just, I don't know, it hits in a different way. It's such a good book and I would recommend that anyone read this. If you need fast-paced, high-action books, it's not for you, but if you want a character-driven story just about somebody sort of exploring their own situation and their own feelings, this one is a really, really good one to read. And then sort of the last little bits to talk about are a couple of extra stories that are sort of back in the Heartstopper world. So these ones came out again last year, but they were originally written a few years ago and published as ebooks, but now we have sort of full books of them. So we have This Winter and Nick and Charlie. This Winter is set right before Solitaire starts, so sort of in the middle of Heartstopper. So it's a story told from the three Spring siblings' points of view. So you've got Charlie, you've got Tori, and then you also have their younger brother Oliver. Again, trigger warnings for mental health and eating disorders, because this is set just after Charlie has been really struggling with his mental health, and it's sort of the first Christmas after he has started getting treatment. It's just sort of dealing with that, how sort of holidays can be hard. If people don't necessarily understand, then it can be very difficult to be in that type of situation. And this one to be a fairly hard-hitting one compared to some of her other stuff, but very much needed and very important conversations in here. One of the things as well with this version of it is that because since originally writing this, Alice has started doing the Heartstopper graphic novels, she's also drawn some images for this one, sort of halfway in between being a book and a graphic novel. And then Nick and Charlie is set a couple of years after both Heartstopper and Solitaire, and this is when, so Nick is a year older than Charlie, and it's about him going to university and Charlie sort of being left behind and how they're going to deal with that in their relationship. I'm not going to say too much about this one because it'll give massive spoilers for everything that's come before, but again, really sort of adorable story. This one in particular has some drama in the middle of it, but then there has the cutest resolution at the end of it, and also again has drawings in there. This one I've actually read a few times because it's quite a nice one to read when you're just wanting something really quick to fly through and a little bit of a pick-me-up. Actually, that being said, when I do need a little bit of a pick-me-up, the Heartstopper graphic novels get picked up immediately. That's me just sort of explaining why I love these books. I was originally going to do sort of like a ranking books for my favourite authors, and then I looked at these and I'm like, I don't know if I can put them in order. I mean, I probably can if I have to, but the thing is that with there being prose and graphic novels, it's like they're quite different. Like my reading experience for them is completely different. If I was going to do it, I'd probably sort of rank them separately. So from the prose books, my number 4 would be Solitaire. I enjoyed the characters, the mystery element of the story didn't really hook me, and I do think the writing style has improved over time. My number 3 would be I Was Born for This. There's elements of this I really, really relate to, but again, the drama was just a little bit too much in places. Number 2 is Radio Silence. This one I adored. The characters are great, the story's great, the sort of meanings of this are really great as well. And then my number 1, is Loveless, which was just such a good book. Again, sort of the characters are great. While it's got less in terms of story, I don't think it's really needed. I think just the relationships in here and the sort of explorations in here are just something that I wish we could see sort of more of this representation in novels, especially for this age group as well. I think both of these in particular, teenagers that are struggling with any of the issues that are raised in here, can be really important reads. Kind of lets you know that it's okay to not fit the mould as you've kind of always been told it has to be. And I think actually that kind of boils down to what I really love about Alice's work, as well as the cutenesses, obviously, because these are in a whole other world of their own. So that's all I have to talk about today. If you like this type of video, let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I will be back with another one of these hopefully in the coming weeks. I have made sort of a list of the authors that I want to talk about, and I'm going to try and kind of alternate between fantasy, contemporary, other genres, although mainly fantasy and contemporary. Spoiler alert, these authors are probably going to appear soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.